Hello everyone, I am Haunting Stories, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now, get comfortable and relax. My name is Louis-Gina, and back in 2016 I decided to take a much-needed break in the vast expanse of the Yukon Territory's Kluane National Park. As a freelance photographer, I'd spent years chasing deadlines and cityscapes, and I craved the isolation only the wild could offer. So I packed up my RV and set off, eager for a solitary adventure amid glaciers and mountain peaks. The park was everything I hoped for. Towering mountains capped with snow, turquoise lakes reflecting the sky, and an endless horizon that made me feel both insignificant and profoundly alive. I set up camp near a secluded spot by the Duke River, far from the designated camping areas. It was early June, and the days were long, stretching sunlight well into the evening. On my second day, while hiking along a lesser-known trail, I met a fellow traveler named Calantha. He was in his late 50s, with a rugged beard and a friendly demeanor. We bonded over our shared love for the outdoors and decided to fish together that afternoon. As we cast our lines into the clear river, he shared stories of his travels through Canada's wilderness, each tale more adventurous than the last. "Ever been up to the glaciers?" Calantha asked, reeling in a catch. "Not yet," I replied. "Planning to head that way tomorrow. They say the view is unmatched." He nodded. "Be careful up there. Terrain can be tricky, and weather changes fast." As evening approached, we parted ways. He was heading back to his campsite a few miles upstream, and we made vague plans to meet again. I returned to my RV, cooked a simple meal, and settled in with a book. The silence of the wilderness was a balm to my urban-weary soul. The next morning, I decided to explore the area near the glaciers as planned. The hike was strenuous but rewarding. The air was crisp, and the landscape shifted from dense forest to rocky inclines dotted with wildflowers. By midday, I reached a vantage point that offered a breathtaking view of the ice fields. While setting up my camera for a panoramic shot, I noticed something unusual through the lens, a flicker of movement far off across the glacier. Zooming in, I saw what looked like a group of people trekking, which was odd given the remoteness of this area. They moved in a staggered line, hauling large backpacks. Curiosity piqued, I decided to get a closer look. As I descended toward the glacier, I stumbled upon a narrow path that seemed to lead in their direction. The trail was marked with fresh footprints and grooves, as if heavy equipment had been dragged through recently. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I brushed it off as overactive imagination. About an hour later, I came across a small, makeshift camp tucked into a hollow between ice formations. There were tents camouflaged with white tarps, crates stacked haphazardly, and the faint smell of diesel fuel in the air. Hiding behind a ridge, I observed the scene. Men were unloading containers and carrying them into a crevasse that seemed to open into the glacier itself. Suddenly, a hand clapped on my shoulder. I spun around to face Calantha, his expression stern. "What are you doing here?" he whispered harshly. "I could ask you the same," I retorted, confusion mixing with alarm. "You shouldn't be here, Louis. This isn't a place for tourists," he said, his eyes darting nervously back toward the camp. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the camp. A group of men was heading our way, speaking in hushed tones. Calantha grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a boulder. "Listen to me carefully," he said urgently. "These people are dangerous. You need to leave now." "Who are they? What's going on?" I demanded. He hesitated before answering. "They're smugglers, trafficking illegal goods across the border using the glacier tunnels." My heart raced. "Are you involved in this?" "No," he insisted. "I'm with the RCMP, undercover. I've been tracking them for months." The voices grew louder. Shadows stretched as the men approached. Calantha pressed a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the air. A gunshot. We both ducked instinctively. Chaos erupted as the smugglers scattered, shouting orders in a mix of languages. Calantha pulled a handgun from under his jacket. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Before we could move, two men rounded the boulder, rifles raised. Calantha fired swiftly, hitting one in the shoulder. The other lunged at him, and they grappled fiercely. I watched in stunned disbelief as they fought, the smuggler's knife glinting dangerously. Seizing a rock from the ground, I struck the attacker on the back of the head. He crumpled, and Calantha pushed him aside. "Thanks," he muttered. "We have to destroy their stash and call for backup." We made our way toward the camp cautiously. The area was deserted. The smugglers had either fled or were regrouping. Inside one of the tents, we found crates filled with weapons and packets of white powder, drugs meant for distribution. "Help me with this," Calantha said, dousing the crates with gasoline from a nearby canister. We set the camp ablaze, flames licking up toward the sky. The smoke would be a signal, but also a beacon for any remaining smugglers. As we retreated, gunfire erupted again. A bullet whizzed past my ear, and we took cover behind an ice wall. "They're not letting us leave easily," I shouted over the noise. Calantha radioed for assistance, but the mountainous terrain interfered with the signal. "We need to get to higher ground." We sprinted toward a ridge, bullets striking the ice around us. Reaching a plateau, Calantha tried the radio again. This time, he made contact. "Officer down. Need immediate extraction at Glacier Point," he reported. A helicopter's distant rotor became audible, but the smugglers were closing in. One of them caught up, tackling me to the ground. We struggled, his hands tightening around my throat. Spots danced before my eyes as I gasped for air. Calantha intervened, pulling him off me and subduing him with a well-placed blow. "Come on, we're almost there." We reached an open area just as the helicopter appeared over the horizon. Relief was short-lived. A group of smugglers stood between us and rescue. Outnumbered and low on options, we prepared to make a stand. "Any jokes up your sleeve?" I quipped nervously. "Not the best time for stand-up comedy," Calantha replied grimly. The smugglers advanced, weapons drawn. Suddenly, the helicopter swooped in low, and armed officers rappelled down, engaging the criminals in a swift firefight. Within minutes, the smugglers were apprehended or incapacitated. An officer approached us. "You guys okay?" "Better now," Calantha responded. As the scene was secured, I sat on a rock, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Bodies were being loaded onto stretchers, some unconscious, others lifeless. The reality of how close I'd come to death settled heavily. "Looks like you got more adventure than you bargained for," Calantha said, sitting beside me. "No kidding," I replied. "Next time I want excitement, I'll stick to roller coasters." He chuckled. "Probably safer." Back at the base camp, I was debriefed by authorities. They took my statement and advised me to keep the details confidential due to the ongoing investigation. As evening fell, I finally returned to my RV, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. The following day, I decided to leave the park. The allure of solitude had been overshadowed by the stark dangers I had never imagined. Before departing, I did some research at a local library. Curious about the operation I had stumbled upon, I discovered that the smuggling ring had ties to a larger criminal network operating along the Canada-US border. They used remote wilderness areas to move contraband, exploiting the challenging terrain to evade law enforcement. Calantha, whose real name was Agent Marcus Hale, had been instrumental in dismantling several such groups. As I drove away from Glen National Park, the majestic mountains in my rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. The open road ahead seemed both inviting and safe, a welcome contrast to the perilous glaciers. In the end, the adventure I had sought had found me in the most unexpected way. I returned to photography with a renewed appreciation for the mundane. As for Agent Hale, he continued his covert work, blending into landscapes where danger lurked beneath the surface. I wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, I thrived on it. After years of pushing myself filming solo wilderness expeditions and gaining thousands of subscribers, isolation felt like a familiar friend. Devil's Ridge, though. This place was something else. I had scouted it out for weeks, planning my trip down to the smallest detail. The ridge was perfect, remote, rugged, untouched. Hardly any hikers came this far into the Montana wilderness, and the few who did warned of getting lost in the dense forests or disappearing into one of the old, crumbling mining tunnels. The place was steeped in eerie local lore, and I loved it. Stories of shadowy figures, night stalkers they called them, spirits of miners who perished in a cave-in over 100 years ago. They supposedly wandered these woods, haunting anyone foolish enough to linger too long. It was exactly the kind of place I could milk for my survival blog. Spooky, remote, and dripping with atmosphere. My audience would eat it up. I parked the RV in a small clearing nestled against a cliffside, setting up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon. The towering pines cast long shadows across the forest floor, and the sound of the wind through the trees was strangely muted. There was no bird song, no rustling of small animals, just the breeze and the soft creak of old branches swaying. Lechner, my drone, hovered above the trees, capturing the stunning panoramic views. I had just set it to autopilot to get some shots of the surrounding cliffs when the feed cut out, static flooding my screen. "What the hell?" I muttered, tapping the screen in frustration. I brought the drone back, its footage corrupted with strange, distorted images, warped figures flickering in and out of focus, standing just at the edge of the tree line. I chalked it up to a malfunction. After all, I was miles from civilization, and the signal could have been weak. But still, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that the footage was wrong. Shrugging it off, I stored Lechner for the night and started a fire, settling in for what I hoped would be an uneventful evening. As I recorded my thoughts for the day, I decided to throw in a few words about the local legend, something to spice up the narrative for my viewers. "They call them the Night Stalkers," I said into the camera, my face illuminated by the glow of the flames. "Spirits of miners who died in these hills, lost to the darkness. But I'm not worried. Just a bunch of ghost stories, right?" I grinned, more to convince myself than anyone else. The first real sign of trouble came the second night. I was reviewing the footage I had shot earlier in the day when I heard a soft sound outside the RV. At first, I thought it was the wind, just the trees shifting. But then it came again, low and rhythmic, like tapping. Lechner growled low in his corner, his eyes fixed on the door. I froze, listening. The tapping grew louder, almost insistent, like someone or something was circling the RV, knocking softly against the metal. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on and swinging the beam toward the door. "All right, whoever's out there, you're not scaring me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. I stood there holding my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. After a few long moments, I convinced myself it was just a branch or something scraping against the side of the RV. I'd been on enough solo trips to know how easy it was to get jumpy out here. But Lechner was still growling, his ears flat against his head. He wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm honest. The next evening, I decided to do a bit more exploring. The cliffs were full of old mining tunnels, most of them sealed up decades ago. I found one near the base of the ridge, its entrance boarded up with rotten planks. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried a few loose, slipping through the narrow gap. The tunnel was dark and smelled like damp earth. My flashlight flickered as I moved deeper inside, casting eerie shadows against the jagged walls. Strange symbols were etched into the rock, crudely drawn, unfamiliar shapes that seemed to spiral in on themselves. I felt a sudden chill, and a soft sound echoed through the tunnel, like footsteps on loose gravel. I froze, shining my light down the passage. Nothing. Still. Something about the place felt wrong. I backed out quickly, breathing a sigh of relief as I stepped back into the daylight. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, the tapping returned. This time it was louder, more deliberate. I sat in the RV, clutching the flashlight in one hand, the other gripping my camera as I recorded the strange noises. The tapping moved around the RV, slow and methodical, almost as if it was circling me. I stood up, heart pounding, and yanked the door open, shining the light into the darkness. Nothing. I stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold air. The forest was still, but the air felt thick, heavy. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, and that's when I saw them. Shadows, tall and thin, flitting between the trees. They moved like people, but their forms were indistinct, more like silhouettes than solid shapes. My chest tightened. I swung the flashlight toward the figures, but as soon as the beam touched them, they vanished, swallowed by the darkness. I stood there frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. The wind had picked up, carrying faint whispers, almost like voices calling from the woods. I backed toward the RV, slamming the door shut behind me. The shadows grew bolder after that. No matter where I went, I could feel them watching me, their dark forms flickering just at the edge of my vision. My drone footage showed brief, eerie glimpses of them, dark, human-like shapes moving through the trees, always just out of focus. I tried to leave the ridge, packed up my gear, loaded Lechner into the RV, and started the engine. But the moment I hit the ignition, the RV stalled. I tried again and again, nothing. It was as if the ridge itself didn't want me to leave. Panic set in. I wasn't one to lose my cool, but this was something I couldn't explain. I was trapped, and I wasn't alone. On the final night, everything came to a head. I was lying in bed, the RV windows covered, trying to block out the tapping that had returned. Lechner was huddled in the corner, trembling. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to get in. I sat up, heart racing, and suddenly the RV shook violently, as if something had slammed into the side. I jumped to my feet, grabbing the flashlight, but the beam flickered and died. The whispers outside grew louder, more urgent, filling my head with a cacophony of unintelligible voices. I rushed to the door, flinging it open, only to be met with complete darkness. The fire outside had gone out. The shadows were everywhere now, circling the RV, their forms more defined than ever. Dark, human-like figures with no faces, no features, just endless blackness. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were coming for me. I ran, flashlight flickering back to life as I sprinted into the woods. The shadows followed, flitting between the trees, their whispers filling my ears, growing louder and louder. I didn't know where I was going, just away from the tapping, the whispers, the shadows. But the forest twisted around me, disorienting me, and soon I was lost in a sea of towering pines and jagged rocks. And then I saw it. The entrance to the old mining tunnel, standing open like a gaping mouth. The shadows pressed in closer, their forms flickering at the edges of my vision. And I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I had nowhere else to go. I stumbled toward the tunnel, the air inside cold and stale. The shadows followed me in, their whispers echoing off the walls. I don't know what I expected to find in there, an escape, maybe, a way out. But as I ventured deeper into the darkness, I realized the truth. There was no escape. The Night Stalkers weren't just spirits. They were part of this place, tied to the land, the tunnels, the shadows, and now so was I. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me whole was the sound of tapping, so soft, rhythmic, and endless. Days later, when Ranger Mikan found my RV, it was empty. My gear was scattered, my camera still rolling, but I was gone. The footage showed brief glimpses of my final moments. Me running into the forest, the shadows close behind, their forms flickering and twisting in the dark. The last frame caught my face, pale and terrified, standing at the entrance of the tunnel. A silhouette stood behind me, tall, thin, and featureless. The Night Stalkers had found me, and I was never leaving Devil's Ridge. My name is Joni Stylen. I was 46 when this happened, and if I could erase the memory, I would. Linda had begged me to take this trip. We need this, Mark, she had said, her voice almost desperate. You've been away too long. The kids barely know you anymore. She wasn't wrong. After another year overseas, I had returned home a stranger in my own house. Robert, my 12-year-old son, barely spoke to me, always hunched over his sketchbook. Alwyn, our 7-year-old, still smiled, still curled up in my lap, but I could feel the distance growing. And Linda, well, Linda and I had been slipping away from each other for a long time. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to drive the RV deep into Everglades National Park, where she promised we'd reconnect with nature. Our friend Caleb Ross, a survivalist and ex-Marine, had offered to come along, saying he didn't trust me to keep the kids alive in a swamp. I laughed it off at the time. I'm not laughing anymore. The campsite was isolated. Beyond the clearing, the swamp stretched endlessly, thick mangroves, still black water, and the occasional ripple of something large moving beneath the surface. The heat pressed against my skin like a wet blanket. Mosquitoes attacked us in thick clouds. Night fell fast in the swamp. By the time we had the fire going, the only light was from the flickering flames and the distant glow of our RV's interior. That's when Alwyn started talking to someone who wasn't there. I don't want to play hide and seek right now, Lulu, she said, staring into the darkness beyond the trees. Linda turned to her. Sweetie, who's Lulu? My friend, Alwyn said simply. She lives here. Linda laughed. Is Lulu an alligator? Alwyn scowled. No, Mommy, she's a girl. She's right there. Caleb exchanged a glance with me. Kids and their imaginary friends, huh? I didn't reply. My stomach had twisted into knots. Something about this place felt wrong. That night, Robert woke me up. He stood at the foot of my bed, pale, holding his sketchbook. Dad, he whispered, someone's outside. I sat up, heart pounding. You see someone? He nodded and handed me the notebook. My blood ran cold. He had drawn a little girl, stringy hair, hollow eyes, and feet that didn't touch the ground. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out of the RV. The swamp was silent. I swung the beam across the trees, my pulse hammering. Nothing. Then I saw them, muddy footprints leading up to the RV door, small, barefoot. My skin crawled. There were no other campers nearby. I forced myself to breathe, forcing logic into my mind. Maybe Olwen had walked outside. Maybe. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, Olwen was gone. Linda's screams jolted me awake. We tore through the RV, calling her name. Her shoes were still inside, but the door was unlocked, left slightly ajar. I ran outside, searching the ground for tracks. Near the water's edge, I found her stuffed rabbit, soaked and filthy. Panic took hold. I shouted her name, my voice swallowed by the swamp. Caleb was already strapping on his hunting knife. We find her now, he said, before night falls. We split up. Linda stayed behind with Robert, too hysterical to help. Caleb and I pushed deeper into the marsh, hacking through tangled vegetation, fighting the unbearable heat and swarms of biting insects. We searched for hours. I screamed Olwen's name until my throat burned. Then we found something, a shack, old, half-sunken, lost in the swamp. Caleb went in first. The inside was covered in child-sized handprints smeared in something dark. My gut twisted. In the corner sat a pile of bones, small, brittle, human. Then I heard it, a child's voice. Daddy! I turned so fast my vision blurred. Olwen stood in the doorway smiling, but something was wrong. Her eyes, they weren't her eyes. They were black, empty voids. Baby! My voice cracked. I stepped forward, but Caleb grabbed my arm. That ain't her, Mark. Olwen giggled. It was not her laugh, it was something else's. The door slammed shut behind us. Something knocked me to the ground. My head cracked against the floor, the world spinning. Then screams. Caleb's screams. I saw him being dragged into the darkness, his fingers clawing at the wooden planks, his face twisted in terror. Mark, help me. I lunged forward, but hands, too many hands, burst from the shadows and grabbed me. Darkness swallowed me whole. I woke tied to a chair. The shack smelled of rot. The walls were covered in drawings, dozens of them, scrawled in childish hands. Then the whispering started. She's ours now, a voice said. I looked up. Linda stood before me, but it wasn't Linda. Her eyes had gone dark, her mouth twitching with a grotesque smile. I struggled against my bindings. Linda, what the hell? She belongs to Lulu now, she sang, rocking on her heels, and Lulu wants to play forever. Robert was in the corner, frozen, clutching his sketchbook. Then I saw it, the newest drawing, a family of 4 standing in the swamp, but I wasn't in it. Instead, there was a new father, a tall, shadowy figure with no face, holding Alwyn's hand. A cold dread filled my chest. Linda, or whatever had taken Linda, tilted her head. You have a choice, Mark. She leaned close, whispering in my ear. One of you stays, one of you leaves. My pulse thundered in my skull. I turned to Robert. His eyes were still his own. I made my choice. I roared and lunged, knocking Linda backward, toppling the chair. My bindings loosened just enough, and I ripped free, grabbing Robert by the arm. Linda shrieked. No, something inside her shrieked. A sound so unnatural it made my ears ring. We ran. I didn't stop to look back. We burst from the shack, sprinting toward the RV. I saw Caleb, bleeding, barely standing. We piled in, slammed the door, and I jammed the key into the ignition. The RV roared to life. Linda stood at the edge of the swamp, smiling. Behind her in the trees, dozens of children stood watching, their hollow eyes following us as we tore out of that godforsaken place. We never found Alwyn. But a month later, Robert was sketching again. I glanced at his notebook and froze. He had drawn Alwyn standing at the swamp's edge. Behind her in the trees, the children waited, smiling. She was still there. It had been 5 months since the divorce was finalized, and I was still trying to wrap my head around it. The life I had imagined, the woman I thought I would grow old with, it was all gone. That's why I decided to take the RV out to Mount Hood National Forest for a long weekend. I needed to get away from everything. No people, no reminders, just me and nature. My therapist said it would be good for me to clear my head and reconnect with something that didn't remind me of failure. Honestly, I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try something. If I stayed home, I would have just drowned myself in the silence of my empty apartment. This trip, I told myself, would be different. I could handle the quiet out here. I arrived in the late afternoon, pulling the RV into a spot near Timothy Lake. It was a beautiful area. Tall Douglas firs surrounded the lake like silent sentinels, the water reflecting the sky like a mirror. There were no other campers nearby, which was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. I parked, shut off the engine, and took a deep breath. The air was cool, crisp, with that faint scent of pine needles. Perfect. For a moment, I thought I could finally breathe again. After setting up a small campfire, I sat back in my foldable chair, staring at the fading light over the mountains. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Peace, that's what I needed. But as the sun dipped lower, the quiet became overwhelming. There was no wind now, no rustling, no animal sounds. Just me, sitting in a bubble of silence. I checked my watch. It was just after 7 p.m. That's when I noticed it. It was too quiet. The forest around me, which should have been alive with the sounds of birds and insects, was dead silent. At first, I figured it was just a lull, but as the minutes dragged on, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears, the soft crunch of every movement I made in my chair. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Maybe this was what true isolation felt like. No noise, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement between the trees. It was subtle, a shadow slipping between the trunks, just far enough away that I couldn't get a good look. I froze, squinting into the woods. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that played tricks on my mind. I scanned the tree line, waiting for the shadow to return, but saw nothing. The trees stood still, their branches unmoving in the dead air. Must be a deer, I muttered, forcing myself to relax. The wind picked up briefly, rustling the leaves. I sighed, relieved to hear some kind of noise again. I grabbed a few more logs and threw them onto the fire. The crackling wood was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. I told myself I was just on edge from being out here, alone, with too much time to think. After eating a quick meal, I decided to call it an early night. The silence was getting under my skin, so I climbed into the RV, locked the door behind me, and settled into the small bed in the back. My phone had no signal, of course, but I wasn't planning on talking to anyone anyway. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to let my mind go blank. But the silence didn't let me rest. The RV was soundproofed, but even then I felt like something was missing. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just the absence of sound. I felt trapped inside my own head. Every little shift of the mattress or rustle of my blanket amplified in the quiet. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. I wasn't sure why at first. There hadn't been any loud noises or nightmares, just silence. But something was wrong. My skin prickled with unease. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and glanced around the RV. The windows were fogged up, and the air felt heavier, somehow oppressive. I heard something outside. No, that wasn't right. I heard nothing outside. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, listening closely. It was the strangest sensation, like my own breathing was distant, muffled, as though I wasn't entirely in my own body. I moved toward the window and wiped away some of the condensation with my sleeve, peering into the blackness beyond the RV. For a long time, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows, and then movement. This time, I was sure. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the moonlight. Tall, unnaturally still, like it was waiting for something. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to see more clearly. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. "Hello," I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't respond. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, my mind racing. Was it another camper? Some kind of ranger? No, there was no way anyone would be out here this late without a sound. I checked the door. It was still locked. Good. But I felt exposed, vulnerable, knowing that whatever was out there was watching me. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it out the window, sweeping the beam across the clearing. The figure was gone. Just like that, vanished, as if it had never been there. The next morning, the forest was still eerily quiet. No birds, no animals. Just the constant oppressive silence. I tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but it clung to me like a wet blanket. I told myself I was just paranoid, that the solitude was messing with my head, but something about the way the air felt today, something was off. I decided to take a short hike to clear my mind, hoping that getting out of the RV would make me feel better. But as I ventured down the trail, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something behind me, but the trail was empty. That's when I saw it again. A figure, this time in the distance, standing between the trees just off the trail. It was the same one from last night, tall, gaunt, and still. My heart hammered in my chest as I squinted, trying to make out more details. But before I could move, it slipped behind the trees and disappeared. I ran toward the spot where I'd seen it, my boots pounding against the damp earth. When I reached the trees, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing to show that anyone had been there at all. I stood there, catching my breath, feeling the silence pressing down on me like a vice. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest around me was completely still. Even my footsteps had stopped making noise. I stomped my boot on the ground, but I heard nothing, not even the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. Panic surged through me. I clapped my hands together. Nothing. No sound. My breathing was shallow, frantic, but it was like I was listening to it from far away. The world had gone completely, impossibly silent. And then I saw them. Not just one figure, but several, moving between the trees. Their bodies blended with the shadows. They were everywhere, circling me in complete silence. My heart raced, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. My legs felt heavy, every step muted, like I was running underwater. The forest shifted around me, the trail disappearing into the thick fog that had rolled in, disorienting me further. Somehow I made it back to the RV. I slammed the door shut, locking it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but still no sound. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was useless. The screen flickered, the GPS spinning in circles. I was trapped. For the next few hours, I stayed inside the RV, pacing back and forth, trying to calm myself down, but the silence never lifted. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts anymore, just the crushing weight of nothingness. And then, as the light began to fade, I saw them again, the silent ones. They were standing in a circle around the RV, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. There were no features, no mouths, just smooth skin where their faces should have been. They stood perfectly still, watching me through the windows, their bodies unnervingly thin and elongated. I banged on the window, screaming, but of course, no sound came. They didn't flinch, didn't move. They just stared, waiting. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave. But the RV wouldn't start. Every time I tried, the engine sputtered and died as if something was draining the life out of it. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping outside. The silent ones didn't move, didn't react. But as I walked toward them, the air grew colder, the silence even more oppressive. My footsteps made no sound. My breathing was barely there. I felt a hand on my shoulder and spun around, expecting to see one of them behind me. But there was nothing, just the fog swirling around me and the figures waiting in the distance. In that moment, I realized what they wanted. They weren't going to kill me. No, that would be too simple. They wanted me to join them, to become one of them. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a part of them, and it was seeping into me, stealing my voice, my thoughts, my very sense of self. And if I stayed here much longer, I knew I would lose everything. I don't remember how I made it out. The next thing I knew, I was driving far away from the campsite, from the silent ones. The sound of the engine, the tires on the road, it was all faint, like I was still caught in their grip. But at least there was something, a reminder that I hadn't completely disappeared into that silence. It's been weeks since I got back, but I can still feel it. The quiet follows me, lingers in the corners of my apartment. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. And I know that one day, they'll come for me again. This time, I won't be able to run. I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment, I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted: isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Lucinda died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost stories book I found at a thrift store. Some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1850s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp. A few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people. No distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows, it was all nonsense. Lucinda would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Lucinda. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old. Things broke. But the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement. Something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside. The crunch of gravel under my boots, the only sound. The night was still. Too still. The kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved, just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it. Faint, like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Nikitin," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows as if someone, or something, had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least, no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting. But nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump. Nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong. But everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange, deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large. Too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there, in the dirt, were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around. Nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight, a loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hand shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered, and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting, but it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted, the fog was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. My name is David Luzin, and in 1980, I was working in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. I always joked that I preferred the company of trees to people, which is probably why I ended up spending most of my days trekking through dense forests instead of sitting behind a desk. As a search and rescue officer for the United States Forest Service, my job was to help people who'd gotten themselves lost or injured in the vast wilderness. You'd be surprised how many folks think a pair of sneakers and a granola bar qualify them for mountain climbing. I've pulled more than one weekend warrior off a ledge because they thought trail markers were just friendly suggestions. One crisp autumn morning, I was called into the ranger station earlier than usual. A hiker named Marcus Rayford had been reported missing by his wife after he failed to return from a solo camping trip. Marcus was an experienced outdoorsman, the kind who could start a fire with 2 sticks and a stern look. His disappearance didn't make much sense, but then again, the wilderness has a way of humbling even the most seasoned among us. "David, you're heading up the search team," my supervisor said, handing me a map marked with Marcus's last known location. "Take Orchin and Patel with you." I nodded and gathered my gear. Orchin was a no-nonsense type who could navigate terrain blindfolded, and Patel had a knack for spotting things others overlooked. We set out to retrace Marcus's planned route, hoping to find him holed up somewhere with a twisted ankle and an embarrassed grin. As we hiked deeper into the forest, the canopy above grew thicker, filtering the sunlight into patches that danced on the forest floor. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant call of a raven. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I'd chosen this line of work. "Hey, David," Orchin called out. "Do you think we'll find Marcus sipping tea with Bigfoot?" I chuckled. "If we do, let's hope Bigfoot shares. I could use a warm drink." Orchin smirked. "You and your mythical creatures? Next you'll be telling us about the time you saw a unicorn." "Unicorns don't live in forests," I replied. "Everyone knows they prefer open meadows." We continued along the trail, keeping our eyes peeled for any signs of Marcus. After a couple of hours, we reached a clearing where the underbrush was trampled. "Looks like someone set up camp here," Orchin noticed, pointing to a circle of stones that had been used for a fire. I knelt down and examined the ashes. "This hasn't been used in days. Could be Marcus's." Patel walked over to the edge of the clearing. "Guys, over here." We joined him and saw what had caught his attention. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch. It was dark green, the same color as the jacket Marcus's wife said he was wearing. "Well, at least we're on the right track," I said. "But why would he head off trail?" "Maybe he was chasing after that unicorn," Orchin quipped. "Or he found a shortcut," Patel suggested. "Either way, we should follow," I said. We veered off the marked path, pushing through the dense thicket. The forest seemed to grow quieter, the usual sounds of wildlife fading into an unsettling silence. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. After all, forests could be eerie places. It was probably just my imagination playing tricks. "Ever get the feeling you're not alone?" Patel asked softly. "Only when I'm with you two," I replied, attempting to lighten the mood. "Funny," Orchin muttered, "but he's right, it's too quiet." We pressed on, and soon the trees began to thin, revealing a small ravine ahead. At the bottom was a shallow stream, its water clear and cold. "Careful on the descent," I advised. Last thing we need is a twisted ankle. We made our way down, and as we reached the stream, something caught my eye. A backpack partially submerged near the bank. I waded in and pulled it out. It was soaked, but I recognized it from the description given to us. "This is Marcus's," I confirmed. Orchin frowned. "Why would he leave his pack?" "Maybe he fell in," Patel suggested. "Could have been trying to refill his canteen and slipped." "Possible," I said, though something didn't feel right. I opened the backpack, searching for any clues. Inside were the usual items: a water bottle, a compass, some trail mix, and a folded map. But there was also a notebook, its pages warped from the water. "Find something?" Orchin asked. "His journal, I think." I tried to read the smeared ink, making out fragments of sentences. "Strange noises at night. Feel like I'm being watched. Found tracks unlike any I've seen." I looked up at the others. "He mentions hearing noises and finding unusual tracks." "Could be a bear," Patel said. "Or maybe he spooked himself." Orchin added, "Either way, we need to keep moving," I said. We crossed the stream and climbed the opposite bank. The terrain grew steeper, and the trees became twisted, their branches gnarled like arthritic fingers. The sky overhead was starting to cloud, casting shadows that seemed to shift and move. "Looks like rain," Patel noted. "Great," Orchin grumbled. "Just what we need." We pushed forward, and soon we came upon a cave entrance, partially obscured by overgrown shrubs. "Think he might have taken shelter in there?" Patel asked. "Only one way to find out," I replied. We approached cautiously. The air near the cave was cooler, carrying a faint odor that I couldn't quite place. "Smells like something died in there," Orchin said, covering his nose. "Maybe an animal crawled in and couldn't get out," Patel suggested. I turned on my flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The beam illuminated the rough walls, revealing markings that looked like scratches. "Probably just from animals," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. We entered the cave, the light from outside fading rapidly. The floor was uneven, and we had to watch our step to avoid loose rocks. "Stay close," I whispered. As we ventured deeper, the odor intensified. Then the beam of my flashlight fell upon something that made my blood run cold. A pile of bones scattered across the ground. "Human bones," Patel whispered, his face pale. I knelt down to examine them. There was no doubt these were human remains. Among the bones was a boot, and inside it, a foot still wearing a sock. "That's Marcus's boot," I said quietly. Orchin swore under his breath. "What the hell happened here?" Before I could answer, a sound echoed from deeper within the cave, a scraping noise, like something heavy being dragged. "Did you hear that?" Patel asked, his eyes wide. "Yeah," I replied. "We need to get out of here." We turned to leave, but the entrance seemed farther than it should have been. The darkness was disorienting, and the walls appeared to shift. "Stay calm," I said, trying to steady my breathing. Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows ahead, a hulking shape that stood on two legs but was covered in matted fur. Its limbs were elongated, and its hands ended in sharp claws. The face was almost human but distorted, with a jaw that hung unnaturally low. "What is that?" Orchin gasped. I didn't have time to answer. The creature rushed forward, moving faster than anything that size should. It swiped at Orchin, its claws tearing through his jacket and into flesh. Orchin screamed and fell to the ground. "Run!" I shouted. Patel and I bolted toward what we hoped was the exit. Behind us, I could hear the creature making wet, heavy footsteps, and Orchin's cries were abruptly cut off. "Don't look back!" I yelled. We stumbled through the darkness, the flashlight's beam flickering as I ran. The cave seemed to twist and turn, each passage looking the same. "This way," Patel called, pointing to a faint glimmer of light. We dashed toward it, emerging from the cave just as rain began to pour. The daylight was fading, and the forest was shrouded in mist. "Where's Orchin?" Patel asked between gasps. I shook my head. "We can't go back." He looked at me, panic in his eyes. "We can't just leave him." Before I could respond, a deep, throaty sound emanated from the cave entrance, a menacing noise that sent a chill through me. "We have to move," I said firmly. We ran into the forest, the rain making the ground slick. Branches whipped at our faces as we pushed through the underbrush. Behind us, I could hear the crashing of something large moving through the trees. Over here, I pointed to a fallen log that formed a partial shelter. We ducked beneath it, trying to catch our breath. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it would give us away. "David, what was that thing?" Patel whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it killed Marcus and Orchin." He stared at me, fear etched on his face. "Do you think it followed us?" As if in response, a tree nearby snapped, falling to the ground with a thunderous crash. "We can't stay here," I said. "We need to make it back to the station." "That's at least 5 miles from here," Patel said. "In this weather, we'll never make it." I thought for a moment. "There's an old ranger outpost about a mile east. If we can get there, we might be able to radio for help." He nodded. "Let's go." We crawled out from under the log and began moving east, keeping low and trying to stay as quiet as possible. The rain continued to pour, and the forest floor was turning to mud. "Why did I sign up for this job?" Patel muttered. "Should have listened to my mother and become a dentist." "Yeah, but then you'd have to deal with people flossing only right before appointments," I said, attempting a weak smile. He actually chuckled. "Fair point." Suddenly, a figure loomed ahead of us. We froze, but then realized it was just an old, twisted tree. "Jumpier than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs," I muttered. We pressed on, and finally the outpost came into view. A small wooden cabin elevated on stilts. "Almost there," I said. We climbed the steps and burst through the door. The interior was dusty, but the equipment looked intact. "See if the radio works," I told Patel. He fiddled with the knobs while I secured the door, propping a chair under the handle for good measure. "Mayday, mayday," Patel spoke into the radio. "This is Ranger Patel requesting immediate assistance." Static crackled in response. "Keep trying," I said. I searched the cabin for anything useful. In a closet, I found a flare gun and a box of flares. "Better than nothing," I murmured. "David, I think I've got something," Patel exclaimed. A voice came through the static. "This is Ranger Station Alpha. Patel, is that you?" "Yes, we're at Outpost 3. We need immediate assistance. There's something out here." "Copy that. A rescue team is en route. ETA 1 hour. 1 hour? Patel looked at me grimly. "We just need to hold out until then," I said. As if on cue, a heavy thud hit the side of the cabin. The whole structure shook. "It's here," Patel whispered. I loaded the flare gun and motioned for him to stay quiet. Another thud, this time against the door. The wood creaked, and the door frame splintered. "Come on, you ugly brute," I muttered under my breath. A clawed hand smashed through the window, shards of glass flying across the room. The creature's arm groped blindly, its nails scratching the air. I took aim and fired the flare gun. The flare shot out, striking the creature's arm. It recoiled with a screech, the fiery light illuminating its distorted figure. "That bought us some time," I said. "Look," Patel pointed out the window. The creature was thrashing about, the flare still burning against its skin. It stumbled back into the forest, disappearing from sight. "Do you think it'll come back?" Patel asked. "Probably," I admitted, "but maybe we can make a run for it while it's distracted." He nodded. "Better than waiting here like sitting ducks." We gathered what we could, another flare gun for Patel and a couple of sturdy branches to use as makeshift clubs. "Ready?" I asked. "Not really, but let's go anyway," he replied. We exited the cabin cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The rain had let up slightly, but the ground was still treacherous. "Head south," I said. "The rescue team will likely come from that direction." We moved quickly, our senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. "What's black, white, and red all over?" Patel whispered. I glanced at him, puzzled. "What?" "A newspaper," he said with a weak grin. "Just thought a bad joke might lighten the mood." I snorted. "That's terrible." "Yeah, well, it's the best I got under pressure." We continued on, and for a moment, it seemed like we might actually make it. Then from behind us, a terrifying roar echoed through the trees. "It's back!" Patel shouted. We broke into a sprint. The creature was closing in, its heavy footsteps gaining on us. Up ahead, I pointed to a clearing where the trees parted. As we burst into the open space, the ground suddenly gave way beneath us. We tumbled down a slope, coming to rest in a shallow pit. "You okay?" I asked, coughing. "Yeah," Patel replied, wincing as he stood up. The creature appeared at the edge of the pit, glaring down at us, its eyes reflecting primal rage. "Together?" I asked, raising my makeshift club. "Together," he agreed. The creature leaped into the pit, and we braced ourselves. I swung the branch with all my might, striking its head. Patel fired his flare gun point blank into its torso. The creature howled in pain, staggering back. Seizing the moment, we scrambled up the other side of the pit. "Go! Go! Go!" I yelled. We ran until our lungs burned, not daring to look back. Finally, the sound of helicopter blades cut through the air. "Over here!" Patel waved his arms. A spotlight shone down on us, and the helicopter hovered above. "Hold tight, we're sending down a harness," a voice called out over a loudspeaker. As we were lifted into the air, I looked down. The creature stood at the tree line, watching us ascend. Its gaze was piercing, but it made no move to follow. We were pulled into the helicopter, where medics began checking us over. "What happened out there?" one of them asked. I exchanged a glance with Patel. "It's a long story," I said. Back at the ranger station, authorities recovered the remains of Marcus and Orchin. The cave was sealed off, and an investigation was launched. No official explanation was given for what we encountered. In the final report, the incident was classified as a tragic animal attack, cause unknown. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the scent of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest were holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One local swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. "Hey everyone, it's Nick here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true." I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pit just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. Before long, I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground. Its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't resemble any language I knew. I filmed it, speaking into the camera as I described the find. "This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog." I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply vanished. One moment, there had been a clear path. Now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me. Alone. In the fog. "Okay," I muttered. You've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. A slow unease crept over me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate steps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just swirling mist. Then out of the gloom a figure emerged, an older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. There was something off about him. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and his gaze distant, like he wasn't entirely present. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like what he was saying. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. A clear path one moment would be swallowed by brambles the next. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Isaac, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing, just thick, twisted trees that looked like they had been there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then the whispers started, faint at first, like wind rustling through the leaves, but soon distinct. Voices calling out from the mist. "Nick!" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Isaac. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." The forest. I tried to shake it off, convince myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside. Water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. A chill ran down my spine. How had it gotten there? Isaac was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog pulsed with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Isaac was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera flickered, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen. Shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures slipping through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange, shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Isaac wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he had never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me, but deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. That's it for today's tale from Haunting Stories. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, The Haunting Stories thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the haunting awaits your return.